Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the first of our speaker series, Insights, the Future of Public Art. My name is Penny Balkenbach, and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Association for Public Art in Philadelphia. This year, the association celebrates its 150th anniversary as the nation's first private nonprofit organization dedicated to public art. Works of art commissioned and acquired by the association since the early 1870s reflect the history of American sculpture and patronage. So, in light of our historic collection and in consideration of contemporary materials and commissions, in 1982, the association began a conservation initiative that today is the longest continuously operating program in the nation. At the time, we made a commitment to have an ongoing program. Our plan of action calls for annual condition audits and maintenance and treatment by professional conservators. For today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce the Taddy family of Taddy Art Conservation. Steve and his son, Zach, are with us today. Son Nick is in the shop. They've worked with the association since we began our program 40 years ago. I think what distinguishes them is that they come from a lineage of artists, sculptors, conservators, architects, and foundry artisans, all descending from the Renaissance sculptor and state architect of Venice, Jacopo Taddi Sansovino. I remember Steve's father, the late Alexander Taddi, who worked very closely with artists, and he even invented the material called Taddy stone for Louise Nevelson. And this supports a tradition of respect for and understanding the artist's intentions. And this is a tradition that the firm carries on today. I think you're really in for an insightful presentation. The Taddi family has long been dedicated to the conservation of outdoor sculpture worldwide. And today they'll highlight their work in Philadelphia, the various and sometimes perplexing conditions that they've encountered, different approaches to conservation, and special considerations when working in an outdoor environment. So during the presentation, please feel free to submit any questions in the Q&A, and we'll respond in the end. Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome our friends and conservators, Steve and Nick Taddi.
Hi, Penny. Thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Zach Taddi. This is my father, Steve. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the conservation work that we do in Philadelphia on an annual basis. And we're going to outline the treatments and the conditions that we see each year, and how this program started back in the 80s with Penny and my father, and how it's continued on, for 4 decades. So this is just our information page. We're based out of New York, but we come down to Philadelphia every year, in early spring, and conduct this work. So let's begin. So a little bit, about our history. Penny was mentioning that we have been in the arts, for a long time. My dad and his father and my grandfather's brother all were in the arts in one way or the other, as craftsmen, foundrymen, mold makers, architects, and all of that knowledge, along with close contact with artists of the time, has helped create this business that we have today for conservation, and gives us a unique insight into the need for conservation and the preservation of art and its heritage.
As a young boy, I used to spend weekends or Saturdays in my father's studio and shop, and I remember seeing artists such as Noguchi and Nevelson and Lovett Lorsky, Daniel Chester French. All these people would come and go. And so as a really little boy, I'd be playing with clay and on the floor and just sort of taking in the whole aura of these, you know, famous, wonderful people, and see them come in and execute their crafts. And I think that stuck with me and actually influenced me later to pursue conservation, restoration. You know, I grew up in a household that was actually full of art and sculpture. And as a teenager, when friends would come over, they would always be amazed at what was in the house, from Remingtons and other bronzes that just happened to be part of our environment. So I just wanted to add that. Okay.
And that's a unique point where, you know, Dad was able to interact with these artists and watch them work in their own, you know, quote unquote style. And each of them had their own unique, you know, educational background in sculpting or painting that led them down their own path. So he got to experience that in so many different lights, which, you know, gives him a unique insight in it himself. So. And yeah, so like Penny was mentioning, this is going on 4 decades now of conservation, restoration, and maintenance in Philadelphia, you know, dating back to 82 and 83. And during each annual cycle, we do between 30 and 40 monuments. It's always varying, but we say, you know, 30 monuments is kind of the baseline. And the program has a number of monuments that are on a cycle of being treated every 3 years, every 5 years, with more extensive treatments during different periods. So we have a very extensive written history of what's done, when treatments are conducted, so that we know when we're prompted for, you know, a major restoration job or, you know, recoating of the protective surface as well. So, and also we do, you know, everything is on a monument to monument basis. It's not, you know, one treatment fits all. So, you know, imagine 30 to 40 different treatments, like slightly varied to the location and the monument itself. And establishing this program, you know, in 83, Dad gave a talk at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, discussing bronze conservation and, you know, methods for it, and the, you know, real need for that type of maintenance program, you know, to be continuing and ongoing. And, you know, he talks about the first, it took him, I think, 3 or 4 years to do what we now do on an annual basis because of the condition of the bronzes and how much work needed to be done. So, you know, doing this maintenance annually keeps the work, you know, at a good basis level, so that larger restoration jobs aren't required so frequently.
The whole purpose of this treatment was, and it took, I think, 3 seasons to get everything up to a condition where they could be put into an annual maintenance mode. And that was really our goal, is to get to all of the works of art so that the treatment could be spread out amongst the whole collection. And once that was done, then this maintenance every year became relatively routine and not easy, but much less labor intense and cost effective. And that was really the underlying goal of this whole project, is how do we not only do the capital improvement, which is the first treatments, but how do we actually maintain this going forward? And I will say that you know, it's been a challenge over the years, you know, even from a financial point of view, to keep it going. And as political flavors change and favors change and economics change, you know, keeping that going has been to the Art Association's credit, that they've been dedicated to this, even though their initial grant was for conservation, but to really keep this going over the years has been a monumental task in itself. And I'm proud to say that we've all stuck to it and been part of it. And today we reap the benefit of a relatively easy ongoing maintenance that we're proud to have done for, you know, 40 years. So.
And, you know, here are just some of the goals, you know, for the program are both, you know, the maintenance and preservation of the monument. But like I said, you know, we're trying to minimize the requirement for major restoration jobs, which, you know, you do see it's inevitable, but, you know, when a monument is scaffolded and covered for years, you know, it's really not an ideal situation when the public doesn't get, you know, to experience that. So, you know, our maintenance is, you know, encompasses these things here with, you know, patination, structural intervention, help with drainage and breathability of metals. We deal with piping and fountain mechanics, and fabrication of missing and lost elements. And we want to thank the APA. They've done, you know, such a great job, you know, over these past 4 decades of keeping on top of this program. And like Penny was saying, it's a unique program, and it really does show and improves the city greatly. And you know, it's an honor to come out every year and do this work. And I can't say how many times I've got stopped while doing the maintenance, you know, on either the big bronzes that flank the steps at the Art Museum to Dickens and Little Nell, and having the public just thank me for, you know, and I'm sure, you know, Steve and everyone on our team that work on it for doing this work, because it really does improve, you know, the community, and it's nice to be appreciated in that sense. And we'll turn a couple of the treatment options. You know, although, you know, the talk that Dad gave in '83 was geared towards bronze conservation, and that method we have, you know, adopted a lot of other materials, you know, into our program as the monuments grow and you know, were installed throughout the city. We have to deal with the materials as such. So for bronze, we have 2 general coatings that we use. One is waxing, and the other is oiling. You know, steel and iron is another material that's you know, separate, that we do, you know, rust removal and sealing to stop that rust and oxidation. And then we have, you know, stone, marble, and cast aggregates in another category, which we deal with cleaning, consolidating, sealing, and you know, removing organic growth on the surface. And let's get into talking about some specific examples that we you know, work on. This is the Spirit of Enterprise by Lifshitz, and it's at Samuel Phillips or Ellen Phillips Samuel Memorial on Kelly Drive. And in this example, we'll talk about, you know, bronze casting a little bit, and core material that leaches from the inside of the bronze that we see every year, but it's easily removed because of our wax coating. So here is some of the core material that has leached from weep holes. When a bronze is cast, it creates what we call as core material, which is a cementatious-like material that binds to the inside of the bronze. And when moisture builds up, it has to find its way out at some point. And this is what occurs, and it comes out in this white substance and then dries. But because of the wax coating that we've applied, it does not do any harm to the underlying patina and can be removed easily, and fresh wax applied every year. So it's just, and here's an after photograph with all the white core material removed and fresh wax on the surface. And you can see that no patina damage, is visible because of that core material.
But that's a perfect example of how, ongoing maintenance, and this occurs every year because the inside is so dense and there's so much core material that it continually will migrate to the surface and aesthetically disfiguring, but not harmful. So again, the wax helps keep that from interacting with the bronze, and it is a relatively simple correction, and the result is quite pleasing and satisfying. So that's a good example of how maintenance can go a long way. And if that was left, for 3 or 4 or 5 years, the piece would look unsightly, to say the least. So
yeah, I mean, that's the the perfect point, that the leaching, especially on this piece, it happens from very specific points on the sculpture and has its own pattern. And if it wasn't corrected on an annual basis, there would be staining in that weird pattern, and people would wonder when they walk by, like, what is this? Why is it happening only here? So it's a way to protect, the wax is a way to protect and then unify the surface, so that doesn't occur and cause damage to the underlying patina. And here is Henry Moore, 3-way piece number 1. This is located on Benjamin Franklin Parkway between 16th and 17th Street. And this is an example of an oil coating rather than a wax. I believe at this point, this is I think the only one that we do oil, and all the other bronzes do get waxed. The difference between the two is that the wax is a softer coating, and the oil is a harder drying. It's a drying oil, and it's got a harder finish to it, which is beneficial, for physical vandalism, which you'll see in a couple of slides. But it's also based on the forms of the sculpture. The oil has a higher gloss, which enhances the sculptural form and the artist's intent here. So
the patina on this Henry Moore, show the next slide possibly, and the surface is smooth. So the oil coating, which is a drying oil, as Zach said, it polymerizes and creates a thin film, which makes the surface look glossy and shiny. And unlike on the Lipschitz, which was a very textured surface, the oil coating here is much more appropriate, and or a lacquer would also be a possible choice. But we use the oil again because it's much easier to do annual maintenance on.
And this is just an image of us cleaning the surface, which is with a pressure washer and non-ionic detergent. So all the sculptures get this treatment before any cleaning with solvents or fresh application of a protective coating are applied. So that's just what you're seeing there. And here is some graffiti that we noticed this year. And the oil coating being a drying coating that provides a hard surface, this adds extra protection so that, most likely this was done by a coin or a key. It didn't penetrate through and damage the patina underneath. And if there was a wax coating on here, it would be much easier for someone to
cut through it.
Yeah, cut through and damage the patina, revealing bronze, which then would be permanent unless corrected with chemical repatination. And here on the left-hand side, you can see the oil, and on the right-hand side, you can see the remnants of half of the graffiti. So we clean the surface with, organic solvents, which remove, the surface dirt and the top layer of the drying oil. And, we have these terms that we use when we apply the oil onto the surface, a fresh application, it actually gets reconstituted into what is existing there, and then they become one. So you can see here on the left, the graffiti or vandalism is no longer visible. And, when this is completed, none of that would be visible, from the surface.
It hasn't gone into the bronze itself. That's the kind of finished surface of polished Henry Moore or an ARP or other pieces of more contemporary, modern, or less traditional, like the Lipschitz or some of the other pieces we work on. But that's a beautiful example of a Henry Moore type of finish and coating.
And it's in a perfect location that the light plays off of the form in its own way as the day goes on. So it kind of has a unique experience to the viewer as they either walk around the piece or see the piece at different times throughout the day. And the space right there in the middle, which is about eye level, is where almost all of the graffiti was. So you can't see the remnants of it anymore. And here we're going to take a little detour and go to our shop in Manhattan and talk about Roman joint construction, which is how bronzes are put together in the traditional sense, not so much so nowadays, but the monuments in Philadelphia and the monuments from the early 1900s were constructed in this way, and it took a lot more skill, quote unquote, behind the scenes to make that happen. So we'll show you this, and this is a sculpture by Frederick McMoynes, Diana, and we had, the experience to be able to take this apart into its pieces in which it was cast and put it back together because everything was loose on the sculpture. So I'll show you some images here. Here is what a Roman joint looks like. Each cast, or each section, so the foot, the two arms, and the body, they're all cast separately, and you can see they're numbered 2 so that the foundry, when they take the pieces out, after it's cast, they know where they go. But there's a male and a female piece that are custom to each section that fit, into one another. And welding was not required for this type of construction, and it was, really, it's a craft that is not studied so much now, and it's a real treat to be able to see the way that these sculptures were put together. And I actually have a little tool just to show you. So this is just us putting the piece back together with loose pieces of brass. Yeah.
So all those sections that you saw laying out, they get fitted very nicely together with these precise joints, and then pins are driven across them and driven through, and that squeezes these joints together, and that's why no welding is necessary. So those seams in the arm and legs are so tightly joined together mechanically that all they need is a little bit of chasing, which is surface finishing work, and no additional welding or support. And that really, sort of sets apart the workmanship of pieces from the turn of the century and up till about the 20s or 30s. But this is just an interesting thing for people to see because they don't usually understand the complexity of how a piece is put together and how the molds have to be designed and engineered to make a simple form like this. And this is really a relatively simple form. It's just the arms and legs, and it doesn't get too complex in terms of that. But those extensions are the pins, and they're tapered and they're driven in, and as they drive in, the metal expands, kind of squeezes the arm and the shoulder area together, and you have a perfect fit that is almost not detectable with the naked eye. So then those pins, of course, are cut off and peened over, which means that they're just knocked into the surface and then colored. But this is a great example that most people don't ever get to see. So,
and this is us just loosely putting it together. And I have a tool that we think my grandfather made, but a pin would look like this. It would be made out of brass, and it would be tapered and pointed and driven in with a hammer to squeeze those joints together. And another benefit of that and not having to do any welding is that when you weld or add material like solder or silver, when you then go to patina the sculpture, the chemical patina doesn't take to those other materials the same way it does the bronze itself. So if you're keeping the sculpture in the same material, it will take the patina the same way and have a uniform look, rather than having a slight discoloration in those areas. And here's this, the finished product. You can't see the joints, and it really isn't a common thing for people to think about. And this is a 10 or 12-inch sculpture. And imagine having to do this on a 25-foot equestrian sculpture. And on Kelly Drive, it's a level of engineering that not many people understand nowadays.
This patina is a very typical statuary patina, but you will not see that on these outdoor pieces too much anymore, because once they've been exposed to the elements for time, you'll lose this very subtle, transparent look that almost makes the skin look real, as if you're looking through, the glow of the breasts and the chest and all that is very realistic. So again, you don't see that too much on our outdoor monuments, but they did, by and large, start out with this brown, reddish brown, which we call a statuary finish, and 90% of them all started out in this color range.
And now we're going back to Philadelphia and the Art Museum. Here we'll talk about the Amazon and the Lion Fighter, the two large sculptures that flank the steps of the museum. And both of these are on our annual list that we do every single year. In this image you can see we have a bucket lift, which we need, and then we have a second technician that has to actually crawl up there and work from the backside so that we could reach every inch. But these are very iconic pieces that we get to work on, and it's a hot spot for locals and tourists. Everyone's running up the steps. So here are just some additional images of us up there waxing the piece.
And imagine this piece was all part like the McMoynies, which you just saw. So the legs of the horse, I mean, this was probably cut apart into 20 pieces, and you can see the scale of this. This is one of the larger monuments in the city, and so you get a sense, but also you do not see that same patina. This is a darker, more monochromatic patina that is evolved somewhat over time, and in this case, we've made no attempt to repatina these, but just to maintain and protect them. So this is a perfect example of a good use of the so-called hot wax and the maintenance that we do in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and you know, I go up there on that lift every year, and you know, because of the craftsmanship from the foundry and the people that you know, worked on this piece and fabricating it, I can't see the joints or anything like that. So it's really a skill that not many people are aware of, but you know, when you're up there and you know, you can't visually see it when you're putting your hands on it, it gives you an appreciation for what was done, you know, just for the sake of the artwork itself. And here's a close-up. As you can see that the surface is, you know, is monochromatic, and there are subtleties of green and black and brown that do get highlighted a little bit when we apply the fresh wax. But at this point, you know, the surface, you know, really does have a pretty uniform look. But the form, you know, in the horse and the rib cage.
Well, you can see down here on the hind leg of the horse. You can see the veins of the horse's leg and the musculature in the chest area. And if this wasn't waxed and coated, none of that in the chest area, none of that would be visible from the ground, and you would lose all of the artistic skill of the artist themselves. So this again is a very satisfying result to the waxing and the maintenance.
Yeah, and another point to note that we always love is this lion's left paw on the horse's underbelly here. There's so much detail that was put in there by the artist. You know, these subtleties that you wouldn't otherwise know. And when we're up there actually, you know, working on it, you can see, you know, the extent of that detail. You can still see it from the ground, but it's so much more pronounced. And you just have to appreciate the skill that was, you know, put forth, you know, on you know, even these small little areas, that the thought that had to go into it. Here's another piece. This is the Garfield Monument by St. Gaudens. It's on Kelly Drive, and it's across the road from the Philip Samuel Memorial. And this year, we found some unique vandalism on the piece, which was a little perplexing, but we were able to fix it because of our protective wax coating being on the surface from the year before and not you know, causing irreparable damage or extensive treatment beyond what we had to do. So this is what we noticed when we arrived to this not super easily accessible sculpture. Someone had decided to, you know, put some silicone caulk all over the left foot of that figure for who knows what the reason behind it was, but you know, as we mentioned early on, you know, dealing with outdoor sculptures, you have a unique set of challenges, and this is just, you know, one small detail that happened in 2022 that we had to deal with. I'm not sure if, you know, Dad has experienced this specific before, but you know, we're always up for new challenges. But you can see the silicone didn't physically bind to the surface because of the protective wax coating that was on there. It pretty much just sat on the surface and dried, even though it was tough to get off. If that silicone was applied to the underlying patina with no coating on it, it could have easily, you know, removed the patina and exposed bare bronze underneath. So we're lucky that the wax was on there and it did not cause any real damage. So here is just an image of the foot, cleaned. We removed all the silicone, and as you can tell, the patina is still intact.
Well, that's a very good picture of the treatment that we so-called call hot wax. I mean, the wax isn't heated. The wax is applied to a warmed or heated bronze, and what that does is it drives out any moisture, that's residual moisture that's inside of the bronze, and then allows the wax to penetrate deeper and create a much more tenacious sort of film. But you can even see in these pictures that you do have a lot of the green that occurred over time, but it's now a dark green and relatively even and a quite pleasing patina. And again, this treatment allows for that evolution of the patina to remain, but to allow all of the folds and all of the modeling and the sculptural quality to come out. And so that's just a good picture of the treatment itself.
Yeah, and you can see, a lot of the monuments do have that sort of green color to it. This is a very close-up view, but imagine the sculptures on the steps of the art museum. They're up 20 feet in the air, but they do have that quality. So it's a very unique patina that we are applying the wax to, and although it may look monochromatic, it's not. And each sculpture has its own story based on the weathering patterns of the location that the sculpture is.
And this piece in particular is under a lot of tree growth, and so it has its own unique conditions based on the trees and the sap and the fallout, and it does not get much sun to dry it out. But has to do a lot also with the granite surround. Keep moving.
Okay, and I'm going to go back just a few years to talk about a different treatment. This is, at Alan Phillips Samuel Memorial, there are 4 of these stone sculptures that are around the memorial, the limestone sculptures. And these are unique because they're within, 100 feet of each other, but they all have their own sort of unique micro environment and gather their own type of soiling, based on where they are and the trees that are around them and their vicinity to the road. But these sculptures get cleaned every year with a biocide to remove organic growth, dirt and debris. And you can see these are two different pieces on the same side. The picture on your left is these pictures are unique, but the one on the left is farther set back from the road and gets more green organic growth, while the picture on your right is closer to Kelly Drive and actually gets more black growth and soot deposits because of its vicinity to the vehicle. So you can see how these sculptures are no more than 150 feet from each other, but they have different environments that are unique to them both. And then these are some pictures from the APA. And like I mentioned early on, we do have certain treatments that we do every 3 years, every 5 years on that sort of cycle. And this is an image of me applying a clear consolidant to the surface after it was completely cleaned, which consolidates the stone and makes it harder, but also prevents organic growth from penetrating this porous stone and causing deep staining, which can then cause an additional issue at that point. So you clean it, and then once the surface is fully cleaned, you apply a clear consolidant to protect the sculpture from that growth, and also it protects it from graffiti as well. It becomes a sacrificial coating, as we like to say. And here are some images of the finished product. these pieces. And here is Social Consciousness by Jacob Epstein, and it's located at University of Penn. And this is newly added to our annual program. I believe it was at the museum for many years and then taken away and was placed here a few years ago and put back onto our list. So we kind of had to start this sculpture with a newish kind of application of wax. And here I want to just do a close-up. This is the first year of our treatment. You can see that there's a lot of green oxidation coming through all over the surface. This is, on the right knee of one of the figures, and it's really just, the wax is uniformly breaking down. And when we apply our wax coating, year after year, the wax coating normally breaks down in very specific areas that are exposed to the elements or receive, more moisture, more sun, and things like that. And here you can see the wax is kind of breaking down all over the surface without a specific, distinct pattern to it. And here's another image of the chest. You can see those streaks are starting to form on the right pecs. And then here's an image of me cleaning it in the same fashion that we did the Henry Moore and every other sculpture. This is really the starting point to remove any dirt or debris that's entrapped in the wax, which does happen because the wax is a soft coating that it has dirt and debris that clings to it. So this is the first step of removing anything from the surface. And then here is the finished product. So those first few images were of the knees on this figure all the way on the left of the screen. So, and the chest area of that figure to the left. So you can see the surface is more uniform. The streaks aren't so pronounced. And the hot wax treatment, really brings the patina together in a uniform way and will now add or give better protection to the bronze. Here's another image of the whole.
I mean, the added benefit of it looking better is an added benefit, but what it does is it indicates that what you saw on the earlier picture of the knee, that you're not getting this very differential kind of corrosion where some areas are lighter, like the top of the knee that gets hit by water and sun, and the under areas are darker, which are more protected. And so then if left unprotected or unwaxed, what would happen over time is that it would become more and more exaggerated. And if you apply that to an area like the face, then the face would start to look disfigured. Certain areas it would look darker, like the eyes, and the pieces would look ghost-like or whatever. And so the added benefit is that aesthetically, the sculpture now reads uniformly. The forms have volume, they have three-dimensionality, and the color is pleasing. It's an honest finish, and it speaks to the benefit of the whole process. And now we can come back annually and do a maintenance on this piece with relative ease. It happens to be an extremely large piece, and it was sited in an area that is in the shade all the time, so it's very cold, and that presents another problem in the application, but that's another story. So.
And that green oxidation, it is corrosion. So if you don't stop that process from occurring, it will begin to bleed and leach onto the surrounding surfaces like this base. It's a beautiful presentation. It's a great location for the sculpture, but if that green oxidation was kind of left unchecked, it would begin to streak down and stain the marble itself, which would then detract from the aesthetic of the piece and the effort that was put into, putting it here in its whole display. And here is a Daniel Chester French, the Grant monument, which is on Kelly Drive. And I don't think we mentioned this earlier, but all the treatments that we do, the wax, the oiling, the cleaning and consolidation were all done and proposed by Dad in the 80s as reversible and removable without harming the underlying bronze and the conditions of the bronze. So, that is kind of paramount to being conservators, is to making sure that we're not doing anything to alter the original or the existing. And, in these stages, Dad started this treatment when the sculptures were at a certain condition, and we're doing our best to maintain it. So here we have a special treatment, which we do on a number of the larger bronzes, especially the ones near Kelly Drive, on a every 5 to 7 year basis. Pending inspection, is we use a hot power washer, which actually melts the wax off of the surface, which over time the wax becomes dark and mutes the patina. So we can remove it without using chemicals or abrasives or anything like that, and then reapply a fresh application of wax onto the surface, which it is nice to do every, like I said, 5 to 7 years. And it really enhances the aesthetic of the sculpture and brings out the subtleties of the patina itself. This is just an image of that Dad took from the 80s during the first round of treatment. As you can see, that there's so much oxidation and variation in the surface, which is still present, but not so pronounced. And yes, the image is black and white, but you can really see the differences there between that and what we work with nowadays. And here, this is after treatment, almost done with the hot wax treatment during the season, that we remove that wax with the hot power washer. So you can see the green is more pronounced, here on the horse, at the top of the horse's right leg. And, it really brings out the story of each monument when you see those subtleties. So it's important to do that, every few years. The sculptures are in need. Here we are, just working up at the horse's face. Here's some post-treatment photographs of that same movement. And that's it. So we want to thank you guys for being a part of our presentation and listening to us speak a little bit about our annual maintenance program, in Philadelphia and for the APA. So if anyone has any questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Krishana Manigan. I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the Association for Public Art. Thank you, Zach and Steve, for this presentation. It was really wonderful. It was really good to see your process, and really good to see, what makes Philadelphia unique in our conservation efforts. I do want to get to a few questions while we have time. So I actually got one in from Maria Nevelson, the granddaughter of Louise Nevelson. And she asks, are there any anecdotes or observations of her work style in her earlier years or use of Tatty Stone?
Oh boy. Well, as my father told me how Tatty Stone came to be, that Louisa used to come into the studio all the time and they would work on things together. And one day they decided to cast some of her pieces, and sort of in the kitchen sink, so to speak, they came up with a mixture of a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which I think was really a hard plaster-like material with some additives. And they were having fun, and I think probably drinking some wine. And they said, what should we call it? And she and her said, well, Tatty dear, let's call it Tatty Stone. And over the years, I've gotten many inquiries about it. And I think that's about as simple as it is, that the two of them were in the kitchen cooking up some concoction of plaster, cement, and probably some various aggregate that was around. And they came up with a pot of stuff, and they cast it. There wasn't that many pieces done in Tatty Stone. It was a relatively small group, but it was just probably one of those Saturdays in the shop, my dad and Louisa. And she was a pretty frequent visitor. And I know my father and mother went to Cuba with her and met Fidel Castro, but that's just another
another story.
Another story.
That's a different conference.
I have pictures of that. So that, yeah. Oh boy, but I mean, he worked in lots of her early pieces before she got into the larger assemblages, and was a really frequent visitor to the studio.
That's a great question. And then I know you had mentioned the studio. Can you tell me what a typical day is like in the studio?
Yeah, it's no 2 day is the same in our shop. So, you know, as my dad and my grandfather, they bred me and my brother to, you know, get up early and start the day. So we're early people, and, you know, start at, you know, 6:37. But in the shop, it's really, we have the gambit of materials, different sculptures from, you know, stone, you know, marble, bronze, acrylic, and we're constantly working on, you know, some sort of repairs. And, you know, people ask us, you know, how many sculptures do you work on, you know, typically, or during a year, or two, you know, there's no real right answer. I mean, we say we generally have, you know, 20 to 40 jobs kind of going at once, but, you know, some of the jobs are, you know, 10 to 12-inch little tabletop pieces, while others are, you know, life-size sculptures. So, you know, we're constantly working on multiple pieces at the same time. And, you know, me, my dad, and my brother were, you know, collaborating and helping with different aspects of different jobs, kind of that come together to create a final product.
Definitely. And how is the conservation approach and techniques, how are they different from outdoor sculpture to an artwork that you would find in a gallery or in a museum?
Yeah, well, the gallery, and all of the galleries, the museums and auction houses all have slightly different, you know, priorities. So you have to kind of start from, as a piece comes in, you know, what is really the ultimate goal, and how do you stay within certain conservation guidelines to satisfy the so-called client's needs, but also to respect the artist's intent. And so, you know, you can imagine that the commercial interests are slightly different than an institution, and, you know, it's a juggling act, quite frankly, you know, to understand what you're trying to, your end result before you start. So the trick is to know where you think you can get to, and explain that to the client, and also satisfy where they want to be, which might be, you know, a little bit different than. So if, you know, you work for an institution or a museum, you could sort of, it's more of an idealized situation. This is much more challenging, because each object, and then the object itself, being whatever the material is and whatever its experience in life has been, presents its own challenge. Like, has this been in somebody's basement near a coal furnace? Has it been near the fireplace, or is it a room where the men smoke cigars there? has it been in a restaurant where it's near the, we do work on Mama Leone's marbles that were full of grease and you know, stuff from cooking, and how does that interact with the neoclassical white marble, and you know, so all of these things start to become challenges that aren't written about in the books. Like how do you deal with the effects of tobacco and restaurant stuff, which, you know, people don't smoke in restaurants now. So I find all that very challenging, but every day is different because, you know, you have to sort of plod through all of those things and then also find a way to make a few dollars so you can continue tomorrow.
Yes.
The outdoor stuff is a little more straightforward because, you know, the environment has done its thing, and unless you want to go back to a, you know, the starting point, we're trying to freeze these outdoor monuments in time. So starting in 1982, we accepted that this is where the monuments were at. You saw the grant, that horse with, it looked horrible. Well, if we strip off all the wax, it would look exactly that way right now. It has not changed. That wax has frozen that thing in time, and that's what we were trying to achieve for the outdoor monuments. Is let's just assume that we've gotten to 1983 and we're going to stop the environment interaction here, and that's what we did. And we actually have stripped these pieces and exposed them. They look exactly, we photographically documented, they look exactly like they did in 83, 84, you know, in 2010. And so I think we've actually achieved that, but it's much different from what we do in the studio. I mean, the studio is many, many more elements to have to think about and juggle. You know, this outdoor thing is much more linear in that way. And you know, that's why it's been nice to work for Philadelphia, because we've all committed to doing that, and we've managed to ride out the years and do it. So, you know, I feel very proud to be part of that.
I mean, it really does take a village to keep all this going, and you know, Dad and Penny's, you know, starting this, you know, in the 80s, 4 decades ago, and you know, I've taken over, you know, 10 years ago or so, but I go around every year with Laura from the APA, and we do our extensive assessment of each piece and document any points of concern. So, you know, it takes a lot of effort to stay on top of it, but, you know, everyone reaps the benefit of
Absolutely.
It, so,
Absolutely. And that leads me to another question. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, which is great. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to them all, but I'm going to find this one. Someone asked, does an artist specify how a piece should be conserved, or do you judge this based on a material and environment only?
Are you talking about living artists?
Yes.
You know, that becomes much trickier, and you know, yeah, I mean, you have a Desubro behind you right there, and each artist is sort of different. You know, Jeff Koons, you know, is very specific and very particular, whereas Desubro would be less so, and more inclined to, you know, just not be so fussy. So, you know, you really, that's a very, living artist is a very, each one is different, and you have to really delve into, you know, what they're thinking and have what their initial intention is. But unfortunately, really, a lot of contemporary artists who deal with outdoor sculpture, you know, don't take into account that repair or renovation or conservation will take place, and sometimes they do not build things with that in mind, so that, for example, some of these larger pieces should be able to be taken apart so that they can be brought to a facility to be worked on. You know, once you get to a monumental scale, you can't just do this work properly, like repaint a sculpture in an outdoor environment and get the type of results you can if you bring it into a environment that's controlled, like a spray booth. And so a lot of these artists don't take that into account. So then it becomes a struggle. you know, are you crossing the line of the artist's intent, but are you saving a piece? And, you know, it's kind of a race to the end line to, you know, once the artist passes away, then it's all, you know, all hands off, and you go back to the foundations, and, you know, they try to respect the wishes of the artist, and it gets, the conversation can get very, very complicated, because the reality is, if a work is outdoors in a public environment, it has to meet certain safety standards, it has to, you know, environmental standards, and, you know, there's certain considerations that I'm telling you a lot of artists do not think about, because, you know, the nature of an artist is not necessarily in that vein. So I think when art in public environment occurs, that engineers and other people need to be consulted. I think that that's the responsibility of any institution that commissions outdoor art, like the in Pennsylvania. You know, that has to be built into it, because I think over time, 10 years is not a long time for something to need to be looked at and refurbished. No paint layer will maintain its color retention that long. Mm-hmm. So right there, you're starting to, you know, and then how do you apply a paint? Do you spray it? Do you roll it? Do you brush it? And that doesn't take into account the substrate that's underneath it. And how do you treat that for underlying problems like rust and what have you? So it's a challenge. The bronzes, in a way, are, you know, much better conceived and built, and bronze as a material is basically copper, and copper, you know, is meant to be outdoors. I mean, look at roofs and gutters and the Statue of Liberty; those are all made out of copper, which the corrosion layer, the green, is a protective corrosion layer, and bronze is basically, like I said, 85% copper. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the traditional monuments at the turn of the century and such are a pleasure in that sense, or easier to approach.
Definitely. Well, I feel like we can talk for a long time. I know there's a lot of questions we can get into, and we're going to have to do this again, because this was wonderful. I do want to thank you both. Penny is on now, but, you know, Zach, Steve, this has been a wonderful partnership, and we wanted to start off our speaker series having you on, so I do want to say thank you. And Penny, do you have any last words?
Well, actually, I do, because the last conversation, I think, brings us full circle, because our work with historic monuments has led us as an organization to be thinking about the kinds of questions we ask artists when we commission new work. So typically we will have an artist consult with a conservator before the piece is made. We also ask artists to articulate and write down their view and their vision for, you know, how they expect the artwork to be maintained. So there are lessons to be learned from all of this, where you can really help the longevity of the artwork and also the intention of the artist by asking the questions sooner rather than later. And I think, having worked with Steve for so many years, that began to seem so obvious to us. And it really, I think, has helped us make very informed decisions, and also has, in a way, given artists a certain level of confidence when they're working with us, that we have the future of their artwork in mind. So with that said, I'd like to thank both of you for taking us on that journey, and Krishana for organizing this. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Of course. And I also want to thank our audience members for joining us and sending in these great questions. I do want to share that our next virtual talk will take place Tuesday, October 18th at 4 p.m. We'll be in discussion with Valerie Cassell Oliver. She's a curator of modern and contemporary art at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And we're looking forward to our discussion with her. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.